All right, Guy, there was a really interesting post by Gary Falkowitz. There's a new group in Facebook. I would actually encourage people to join. It is around law firm intake. It's called Law Firm Intake Fundamentals. The initial post in there by Gary, who's running the group, asked the question, should lawyers be involved in intake? And I was almost taken aback by the answers. It's a
what were the answers?
The answer was it was a 2-to-1 in favor of lawyers being involved in intake, which means one out of three of you thinks lawyers don't need to be involved in intake. And I thought that was really, really off. And to me,
why?
Well, I think it's the right question, but it's the wrong audience. Asking a bunch of lawyers if they need to be involved in intake, it's the wrong question. It's the right question. It's the wrong audience. It doesn't matter what happens when you read the comments, what you see here is like, hey, it takes a lot of time. I'm wasting my time. We're going to sign them anyway. We're really good at this. But the question should be posed not to the attorneys, because they're viewing this. You are viewing this as an assessment of the value of your time as a lawyer, as opposed to a salesperson. The question should be posed to prospects. And to me, with a few noted exceptions, and there will always be exceptions, but for the vast majority of people, if you are calling a law firm, your desire is to speak to an attorney and not an intake specialist or not some smooth, slick system, but it really is to talk to an attorney. And as a purely craven marketer, I really want my lawyers to be invested in converting all of those prospects into clients. And one of the most important ways to do that is give people what they want, which is to talk to an attorney.
So I generally agree with just about everything you said. Definitely the only feedback that's really relevant here are the people that are calling into the firms. I will say this. Forgetting about the resource thing, right? Because that's a valid consideration from a business standpoint, the value of your time and should you be doing that or whatever. But also to the service and the client experience, to your point, like there's certainly value in starting to establish that relationship. But I think the other thing that's going on in this poll is what's getting clumped under the umbrella of intake. So someone calls the firm and they're like, I think I need a lawyer. And someone takes their name, information, brief description of their situation, or does some screening, oh, this happened 25 years ago. Like, yeah, we're unfortunately, we're not gonna be able to help you, that kind of stuff. Frankly, I think that it doesn't really matter. I mean, I think the efficiency side of things, and again, I'm kind of apples for apples, assuming that the lawyers are trained and good at intake, because I'll tell you this,
Fair
I've seen
question.
a lot of situations where like the lawyer is a liability on the phone. In fact, we were just reviewing some calls for this one firm, and we're driving crazy amount. I'm sure you see this too, but crazy amounts of calls, and then we're like, and the lawyers like, well, they're not turning into clients, and so we're like, oh, well, are they not targeted? And then you like go and you look at the keywords and you look at all of the stuff going on, and then you listen to the call, and you're like,
got it.
Why.
Here's the problem.
That's why they're not turning into clients. So let's just apples for apples and say we're talking about expertise in intake, whether it's a intake specialist or a lawyer. To your point, all that really matters is, are you delivering a great experience to the potential client? I do think your point about the expectation about talking to a lawyer, you can't get around that at some point in the process. And that's why I got back to kind of segmenting intake. Like if you're talking about the initial screen, I think there's a good empathy, professionals.
Sure.
You can do some initial screening, but at some point, yeah, you got to talk to a lawyer. So is that intake? I mean, you can call it whatever you want. Intake part 2. That's building the relationship with your client, though, right? Now, I think there's
intake part 2, right? Like I think where I would go, being as aggressive as a marketer as I possibly can, the intake part 2 kind of suggests that it's okay to set up that meeting, right? My best practice is the live transfer to a lawyer right now.
Of course. Yeah. I didn't when I said intake part 2, I didn't mean anything temporally. I was saying after the initial screen, right?
I just don't want to let our listeners get away with that, right? Like, it's okay. I can just get them on the calendar. Not best practice.
Ideally, it's hot transfer. It's start. You want to get them, describing their case, and you want to qualify the consultation immediately, and then shoot them a retainer to sign on their phone. Right.
So before we move on, I think I'm going to leave with 2 points. One is the person on the phone does not need to be the lead attorney. The caller wants to talk to an attorney, and that can be, the worst lawyer in the world who is empathetic and listens really well to a client and isn't, this does not have to be the partner. Number 2, and this was Gyi's point, I wanted to hit this really hard. You said you were reviewing calls with a law firm, right? How many of you are reviewing your calls? Because there's so much insight to be gained by listening in to the calls that are coming into your firm. And I suspect most of you will be disappointed if you take a listen to those calls.
Money makes a it makes a world go round. Money makes a world go round. Yeah, money make a world go round. Money makes a world go round. Yeah, money make a world